So this panel is really meant to be a reaction and commentary panel. So even though people will speak and present, it's really meant to be their comments on what they're thinking and what they would like to bring to the conversation, with the expectation that we then want to hear from you. So as you're listening to the speakers, your assignment is to think of the 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you really want to make sure we share as a group. In other words, you raise it in the group if it doesn't come up here, or comment on the things that were said here. And then also to start to talk about the relative importance of that. Not that we have to agree on that, but we'd like to hear how people think about what is most critical and what isn't. Before I launch into that, though, I do want to take a moment to thank Crystal Hayslip, Ellen Daniels, and the rest of the staff for the management of this. I hope, as you have felt, I'm very lucky in terms of who we've managed to get to work on these things, and they take great care of everything. So, and they do it in such a way that you probably don't even notice it. So I just want to take a moment and thank them for all this. We're going to speak in order, and I'll give a brief introduction of each speaker before we move on to the next one. The first speaker is Deborah Kasak. She's the Executive Director of the National Forum to Accelerate Middle Grades Reform. The Forum is an affiliation of the country's most prominent associations, foundations, researchers, and practitioners united to speak in one voice about needed improvement in the middle schools. So these are the guys who were in the middle schools before being in the middle schools was cool. And they've been leading in that for a long time, and they continue to work on it day in and day out. And she's been the executive director of that forum since 2002. Deborah.
So good afternoon. Okay. So I'm here to bring a somewhat hopeful message. Usually we're preaching to choirs of other middle grades educators and everyone goes along with it. And here today I'm able to preach to a different choir talking about youth development and how that fits into the middle grades vision. And I want to start out by saying I was taking notes during this time of key phrases that came up during the yesterday and today. So I want to start by saying that the middle grades does not need to be a Bermuda Triangle. And we're going to show you some of the examples of that today and how we can really take the ideas and we can show you and it's happening in places across the country. So in the last 2 days, we've learned that young adolescent brains are just fine, right? That's great news. And with the right kind of fit and our intentional actions, we can actually make and unleash the learning potential for students in our school environments. There were 3 sound bites that got a little bit bigger letters on my notes. One was small communities, large family. And the reason I wrote down that one is we talk about breaking our schools into small communities for learning. But when you're out at really terrific middle grade schools serving any kind of student, they are concerned about us as a family, as a school, a place where we are all belong and are together. The other phrase that caught my attention was about culture and climate and the snowball effect on students. And I bring that up not only because of what we see in the group that I'm going to tell you about called Schools to Watch, but we've also been involved in working with and investing in an innovation development grant. And we spent the first few months, 6 months, building relationships with our coaches in the schools, turnaround schools. And the next year we built working on building climate and culture and turning that around in schools. So that really resonated with me. And the last one that I'm probably going to use this more often. Someone's got to be crazy about the kid. And the National Forum and the members of the Forum, we're crazy about the kid, about the young adolescent. Okay. So let me just show you how these two come together. And in fact, through most of this day, yesterday and today, the forum members would say to me, this is just giving validity to what we do. Because we know that we're very pivotal for creating the graduates of the future. That's become more and more in line and known to policymakers in the last couple years because of the work of the early indicators work and Bob Belfan's and the work out of Johns Hopkins and Diploma Now. And we also know that we have to provide a learning support for the whole child, that it's not just about one piece of their development, academics, but it's about the whole child. And when I went in before here to look at what's the main themes and ideas in youth development theory out there, I saw things that just resonate with what we do in the middle grades. A sense of safety, appropriate structures, supportive relationships, opportunities to belong, positive social norms, youth responsibilities and meaningful challenges and opportunities for skill building. When you see a great middle grade school in action, you see all those types of qualities happening and all those types of programs in the building that make it a great place for young adolescents to grow. So the National Forum has been around since 1997. Came out of the work of several foundations who had great projects going on in different parts of the country. But we came to the realization that it's better to work together than to work in isolation. And so at that time, about 45, 50 different people and groups came together and started talking about what would be the vision of a high-performing middle grade school. And the reason that we thought it was so important to come up with a vision of what a school would look like is the middle grades community and the talk about middle grades has not always had one clear vision. And so we tried to incorporate what we knew from all our different partners into a vision. And so we want to prepare students to be lifelong learners, ready for college, career, and citizenship, very important. And we're going to try to make every middle grade school in the country academically excellent, responsive to developmental needs, and the interests of young adolescents and socially equitable places to learn. I want to clarify, we use the term middle grades, not middle school when we talk about it, because we're concerned about what happens in grades 5 through 8, no matter where they are. There are about 70 different types of grade configuration buildings in this country. So we don't want to get into the discussion of should you be a K-8 or a 6-8 or a 7-8 or a 7-12 or whatever those 70 configurations are. Our message is it's what you do when they're in your building, no matter what kind of building configuration you're in. And that's not been a real clear message, so this vision statement helps us. Another quotation. We are very happy to be here and to be part of this and part of the conference because we want to be at the table. Middle grades education has not been at the table very much, and we're tired of being on the menu. Just let me tell you that. Isn't that right, forum members? Yeah. Lots of times the middle grades get blamed for a lot of things. We want to do this not just in a few cases across the country, but we want to scale this up to be the norm. And you may ask, well, you've been around since 1997. Why is that still the exception and not the norm? Well, as you heard yesterday, we had the comment made that in the last 10 or 12 years, with the policy and around No Child Left Behind, the focus has been almost exclusively on getting test scores raised. And that puts an enormous amount of pressure on teachers and principals, and it makes them focus on the academic portions, sometimes at the exclusion of other things. 2, I think the harsh financial times have made it sort of tough on our middle grade schools to do everything that we know is right to do with kids in the middle. It has impacted the kinds of resources our schools have and the types of structures that we can have that support the main elements of a good middle grade school. And I think the other thing is that we are growing in numbers with this, but we're not yet at that universal critical mass across the country that helps the movement and momentum develop. So we're making progress, but we're not all the way there yet. Ooh, that one's a little blurry up there, isn't it? Okay. So here's what we talk about all the time. It is a balance between academic excellence, social equity, and developmental responsiveness. If you only focus on one part of that and not any of the others, your school's a little out of balance. If you focus too much on developmental responsiveness and not as much on the academic excellence, you get criticized a lot for it. So we want to make sure every student has a top flight educational experience, that we do it with support, that we do it with sets of teachers who know and care about their students, and that we engage students in learning that's meaningful, that gives them real-life problems to solve, and it gets them to use their minds well. And then we do all these things in the atmosphere and the climate of what kinds of structures help us facilitate that growth and development that we're looking for. So we talk often about the structures, norms, and processes. And when you walk into a high-performing middle grade school, they found ways to make that school more personalized with small groups for learning. They found ways for teachers to collaborate together. They find ways for teachers to address problems that have to do more than just with behavior, but how do we get to academic issues and curriculum and development. There's norms about where they function and how they talk to each other. So one way that we have found that we try to begin to talk about where would you see these schools in action, the forum said we need to send people to places. Where are those places? And so around 1999-2000, we started an initiative called Schools to Watch, where we identified 4 schools, one in Illinois, in Chicago area, one in the Champaign-Urbana area, one in Kentucky, and one in Texas. And these were schools that went through a pretty extensive evaluation. And we said, can we see all those elements that we want to see happening in these buildings, and is there an upward trajectory? Well, those schools got a lot of attention, both within the country and also internationally. And then we all looked at one another and we said, but how are we accelerating reform if we're doing it one school at a time? And we've been trying to think of how can we build this system so that it will scale up so we can become the norm rather than so we can become the norm. That threw me off just a little bit, I'm so sorry. So we started Schools to Watch. And this is the way that we're hoping to spread that message and also the practice. It's built on exemplars for research-based and best practice. And so what we heard during these last 2 days, that's why it was so affirming, because what we have happening in these schools is about how young adolescents develop and grow and learn. With the state program, we started in 2002 with 3 states. We're in 19 now, and we have 326 schools identified at this point, 324. There's a little bit of give and take because schools have to go through a redesignation process every 3 years, which keeps them in that continuous improvement cycle. So sometimes we have to say to a school, we can't redesignate you right now. We'll have you come back and try that later. And the part that I want you to know is that these are in schools in all different kinds of settings. They're in urban settings, they're in suburban settings, they're in rural settings, they're big schools, they're small schools. They're schools that have all types of student populations in them. And everyone who is involved with Schools to Watch talks about the Schools to Watch vision, the Schools to Watch rating rubric, and the criteria, because that's what helps guide the improvement process in the schools. We believe it's emerging as a national model, and we think that we can affect policy both at the federal and state level. Our partners, we do work together on this with some really important partners, and we try to have that message, that single message with it. And we did begin to get, after we started this, we began to get schools who started asking for help in, well, how do we get to be a Schools to Watch? What might we do? And so we were able to, and very fortunate to receive an Investing in Innovation Development grant based upon our promising idea of the Schools to Watch rubric and criteria. And so now we're also working in 3 states in 18 turnaround schools. We're just finishing our 2nd year. And what I want to say to you is, we believe, and we have some emerging data that shows that turnaround is indeed possible, that you can create different cultures when you use this vision of high-performing middle grade schools. And the other nice thing about that is we are showing academic upswings. And so it is our hope to continue to make this happen and that we can reach even more schools. What's the value of schools to watch? And this is what I think has made such a huge difference for this practical application. We do have a common set of criteria for schools. You know what that does? That gets the vision and mission across the whole school, but it informs educators in those schools who maybe haven't been prepared to be middle grades teachers, because not every state has middle grades teacher preparation programs. It prepares leaders to learn about how to be a high-performing middle grades leader, because there aren't many places that prepare leaders to be middle grades leaders, schools middle grades leaders, like we heard earlier from people about preparation. It also helps us spread the same message across. There's opportunities in this for networking and mentoring, and the way that we feel scale up can happen is by schools helping and sharing and showing each other that things are possible, because I have students just like you have students. Come to our school and see it happen. So our schools to watch in the different states take on many visitors. They have people come and look at them and ask them questions, and they break down the barriers of obstacles to innovation. There is continuous monitoring for improvement. All of our state directors who run the programs also have the 3-year redesignation process. And here's a little note I want you to take with you. We have some schools that are now being redesignated for the 3rd time. So they've been doing this 9 years. A majority of them don't have the same leaders who were there. But when the state directors talk about what's happened in these schools since the last time they were redesignated, they say they're even more phenomenal places than when we first designated them. And why is that? Because the culture and the climate and the teacher leadership of the building has helped that continue to grow. There's improved performance for students, and we do talk about the culture and the climate and healthy growth. So what are some common things that we hear when we're learning about what's happening in our schools to watch across the country? They do have dynamic visionary leaders. That's very important. But they also have leaders at the teacher level that make it happen. There's challenging curriculum for students. Not challenging just because it's high-level content, which it is, but in the way that they ask students to engage and get active in the learning environment. There's a lot of data-driven decision-making going on in these schools, and that makes the achievement go up. Teachers look at this work collaboratively. They're happy and positive, involved students. And if you know middle grade students, which it sounds like from a youth development standpoint you do, early adolescents, they can love you one minute and not like you the next, and it can go up and down, up and down. But somehow in these schools, they've created the culture and the climate so that students feel that they belong, that if they put out effort, they can be different, they can achieve, they can be more of what they potentially see themselves being in the future, and they have a place that's theirs where they can have voice. There are many small communities for learning happening in the buildings, and what that does, it creates a community of trust at the team level and at the building level, and it builds bonds with parents. When you have teams of teachers who are responsible for the same set of students, sometimes for more than 1 year, where they loop with the students, you develop those long-term relationships that provide stability for students, but also for families. So when a family enters the middle grade school, you may see a small team, have individual small group sessions with all their parents before school starts. You may see them doing in the first 2 weeks of school, we're going to make sure every one of our students is called, the parents are called, and we talk to them about what kind of relationship we want to have here into the future and how we're going to do everything we can to make this a great experience for your students. There's a high level of faculty commitment. I've even been told, I was at a schools to watch visit, and there was a teacher in the room who said, I got a job to work, an offer of a job to work full-time in the neighboring district. I said no, because I'd rather work here part-time because of what this school does and how it is, than go to another school where there doesn't have this kind of mission and vision for what great places should be for young adolescents. There's a lot of attention to all what we would call the non-cognitive goals of education, and these places have a lot of family and community involvement. Now, they're never satisfied. That's the other thing we know. They're always looking for what other way can they connect, but they do have a way to connect with their parents and their communities. And the other thing about the teachers is oftentimes they do work harder than they've worked in maybe other settings where they were isolated teachers, but there's such a sense of efficaciousness that they are doing something important and making a difference. And I think of our great cheerleader here, Bernard, who said, you know, let's get out and do these things. And that's the kind of leadership we need at the district level that says, this is all possible, we can do this together, and this is how we have to structure our days. So I wanted to let you know that you can find out that information about the schools. It's no mystery. They're up on www.middlegradesforum.org. There's a tab for schools to watch, and you can go in there and see what's happening in all the different states. All the schools are listed there. There's a summary about the schools and all the different practices that they were noted in their site visits. They all get site visits. And that's a place where you can begin to see schools in action. Other schools can use the rubric. We have lots of ways that we can connect and make the process, we hope, scale up across the country. And we are always looking for new states who want to join the process of this really exciting adventure into making the middle grades, not the Bermuda Triangle, but the place of hope and future for our students. So thank you very much.
Speaker is Joseph Mahoney. Professor Mahoney is in the Department of Education at the University of California in Irvine. He was trained as a developmental psychologist, and his research is concerned with social educational development of school-aged children and adolescents. His work is focused on the developmental consequences related to how young people spend their out-of-school time. In his current position at the University of California at Irvine, Professor Mahoney directs the Center for Research on Out-of-School Time and the Certificate in After-School Education program. Among the many important activities and accomplishments that he's received SRCD's Distinguished Congressional Policy Fellowship and served as the lead education counsel for U.S. Senator Jeff Bingaman. Okay. Joe?
Good afternoon. Let's see, the first thing I would like to say, other than it's very cold in this room, is that I am more pleased to be here than anyone else. The reason is, first of all, I was supposed to be on 2 different university committees yesterday, and I was able to get out of that. And then the second is I was able to finally meet Debbie and then Michael Yudin. And Michael Yudin worked in Senator Bingaman's office as well, but for 9 years, I understand, as lead education counsel. And I once tried to sit in the chair that Michael Yudin used to occupy, and I got an immediate static electricity shock. So I never tried to sit in the senator's chair. But I'm also glad that Michael's here because in a minute I want to ask him for some money. But we'll get to that. What I'd like to cover are 3 sorts of issues here. One has to do with after-school educators, and I think we heard early yesterday during the pessimism of panel 1 that we're not doing what we know how to do. Science isn't becoming practice. We're not attracting and keeping the best teachers necessarily. We don't pay them enough. And I'd like to kick that pessimism up a notch as we talk about after-school educators. So we'll get into that. Then I want to say a little bit about summer. I am going to talk about health, which is why it's the not so skinny on summer. My graduate advisor was the late Bob Cairns, and Bob Cairns said, if you want to make a point, make it softly. Our education policy for summer is not to educate in summer. So I want to address that. And then finally, I want to say a little bit about out-of-school time and how it interfaces with international achievement differences. To begin, I hope that we don't have to debate this first point. I think that organized out-of-school activities can benefit young people in multiple ways in terms of achievement, social emotional learning, and physical health. But can is the key point there. Whether this happens, and by organized activities, I'm talking about sports, arts, music, clubs, scouts, those sorts of activities, just so we're all on the same page. After-school programs would be another example. Whether it happens or not depends upon quality. We certainly know poor quality programs don't confer benefits. And actually, if you look at that review, the Weisberg, Durlach review, many programs do not confer benefits. The reason that there's an overall positive effect size is that some do a very good job, but many have no effect. And we've certainly done a series of studies to show that very poor quality programs are harmful, just like any other developmental context. There are many ingredients in a quality program, but I think that the staff that run the program would probably be the thing that you would focus on first. Staff control everything from safety to the program climate. We've heard quite a bit about that, to the kinds of activities that are offered, and therefore to the types of developmental experiences that young people would have access to. So where are we at in terms of after-school educators in this country? Well, if you look at the National After-School Association's summary on page 1 of their report, many workers with little experience or education directly relevant to after school, frequent turnover, and many part-time workers, suggesting the need for training approaches to ensure basic knowledge of after-school work. Now I'm going to break forum and ask for a little audience participation, since I'm sitting here in front of a group of educated, very handsome, terrific scholars out there. What are some things that we know from K to 12 professional development are good ideas in terms of training teachers? Problem-based learning, okay, good. Performance feedback. What was the last one? Job embedded, and what does that mean? Training on the job. Okay, so active experiences on the job. Okay, good. These are not exactly the ones on my list, but they're sort of like it. So, if you look through the sort of synthesis and meta-analysis, it seems you need sustained learning opportunities, right? A workshop here or there is not going to do it. But you also need active learning opportunities, where you're going to be able to apply what you learn out in the field, and you're going to have opportunities to come back and reflect on it with a mentor, master teacher, expert. And then there's got to be a focus on content knowledge, so you actually know how to teach the skills that you want young people to learn. What are we doing in the after-school field in this respect? Something kind of different. We usually are satisfied with a day or two workshop if you're lucky enough to attend that. There are some meetings that happen at these programs. There are sometimes webinars. Those aren't the effective approaches. So I'd like to talk a little bit for a moment about what we can do, and then I'll get to my financial request for Michael in just a second. At UCI, we've started something called the Certificate in After-School Education. And I'll take 2 minutes to describe this program, because this is what I think is like a Cadillac version of how to educate after-school workers. So it's actually 6 quarter-long courses. And we believe that after-school educators need some core knowledge. So we think that they should know something about the out-of-school field and out-of-school research. They have to suffer through Professor Mahoney's out-of-school learning course. But they should also know something about kids. So they got to take a developmental course. We work with a very diverse population in Southern California, so they take a multicultural education course. All of this is blended with field work, and it's a university-community partnership. So we've partnered with multiple different kinds of programs throughout Orange County. Then for the content knowledge, we kind of have 2 tracks. We've got a STEM literacy kind of track, where you can see they take courses in reading and literacy and after school, tutoring, so they do something better than watch kids do their homework, math and science. And then there's an expanded kind of learning track where you learn about coaching, sports, physical education, technology, arts. They've got to take courses from both tracks, and they're blended with field work of variable hours chosen by the instructors. And we cap it all off with a capstone, where they get to put all of their experiences in 50-hour field work that's supervised not only by the classroom teachers, but by the person at the field site throughout this entire experience. And then they do a final exam, which is actually a product where they show what they can do. Parents can come and so forth and watch their final product. I think this is a great model. I don't think we can do this at every university. But I think we can do this if we think about opportunities for distance learning. Right now, in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, do you know how much language is in there around the professional development of after-school educators? Don't it? I worked with Senator Jeff Bingaman last year to produce an amendment that was accepted into the base bill of the Senate bill for ESEA, the first language around educating the after-school workforce. But what we need to do, I think, ultimately is take something like this and give this knowledge away. And so we would like to create the best of our coursework into 10 units that could reach those staff that are likely to turn over very quickly. And the way we're doing this is through the Center for Research on Out-of-School Time. So that brings together not just all the instructors from these courses, but the line staff and directors from all of our community partners, along with graduates of our programs, the dean of our school, all into the same room to talk about what do you need from us to train your staff? How can we put this together in an online format that's going to be the most valuable to your staff that are likely to be gone in a year or two? We are ready to go on this as soon as the Department of Education provides a little bit of support for our initiative. And so that's one thing I'd like to say about the after-school workforce. The next thing I'd like to do is talk for a moment about summer. And I underscore that kids actually do develop in the summer, believe it or not. And we know something about this through the summer slide and achievement. I think you're all aware of that. There's also an obesity crisis. And what we know from work with early childhood education is that weight seems to double for kids in the summertime. And then we talked yesterday about kids in adolescence and brain development and risk-taking behaviors and inclinations to get into trouble. It's the longest consecutive period of out-of-school time and a period where they are often unsupervised by adults. So it's an opportunity that's there for getting involved in deviant behavior. In essence, summer is a season of risk. I think we can do something about this in many respects. One opportunity is to increase the availability of organized activities. And I want to say, can I talk about one research study since I'm a scientist? So we did a study of adolescents over the summer, and it was focused on obesity. This is the panel study of income dynamics, a nationally representative sample. And we look at the care arrangements that early adolescents had. Some kids spent a lot of time in organized activities like sports. Some kids spent a lot of time with their parents. Some kids spent a lot of time with relatives. Some kids spent a lot of time in self-care. One thing we found is that kids that were regularly involved in organized activities the following school year had the lowest risk for obesity, even after controlling for demographic factors and prior measures of BMI. But what arrangement do you think was the most risky? Another question to the audience. There are no wrong answers, there's just one right one. Self-care. Now, it was mentioned that no a priori hypotheses turn out. That was my a priori hypothesis. It did not turn out. Parent care was the highest risk arrangement in terms of increases in BMI. Why? Because kids are at home, often in passive activities, and they're around food. What we also found, however, though, is that those kids that had a combination of arrangements of parent care and organized activity care had significantly lower body mass index and risk for obesity than kids who were only in parent care. This helps us to sort of broaden our understanding of certain context and fit. Parent care has often been talked about as a safe environment for young people when the outcome is something like deviancy and getting involved in risk behaviors. But if you switch the outcome to something like health, that same context can pose a risk. So again, here I think organized activities could be beneficial. Problem. In 2010, the California State Senate did a look at youth summertime programming in the state and concluded that 74% of families have no access to summer programming. So even if we get this quality initiative that I'm interested in terms of training, what's the point if we don't have the programs? So we also need to expand access of programming. I also think we need to pay attention to expanded learning time. Expanded learning time is a longer school day, school week, or school year that can extend into the summer. There is certainly evidence, not as much as the traditional after-school programming evidence, but certainly evidence that expanded learning time can be effective in boosting kids' achievement. Look at the public-private venture study that came out, a random assignment, longitudinal study, tracked kids for 4 years. By the end of the second year, significant gains for kids that were in expanded learning time schools, the higher achievement schools around DC. There are other such studies that are out as well, and New Mexico has a statewide initiative that's a random assignment study that's showing promising results. I think we need to be worried about the fight, though, around the 21st Century Community Learning Center funds, and Michael may comment more on this as well, but the money for 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which first became substantive in 1998 under Clinton's administration, was traditionally used to fund after-school programs, and now that has broadened. And you can choose whether you want to continue to use that funding for after-school programming, as you always have, or use it for expanded learning time. There's no new money in Washington, and so that pot of money has different uses for it. I think that it's actually a good idea. I think that there's evidence for both sorts of programming to be effective, and that states should be allowed to choose the way in which they would like to spend it, particularly if there is no priority by the Secretary on which way it can be used, and that there's a requirement that community partners be involved in expanded learning time opportunities. That's exactly what was in the Senate bill that was passed out of the Help Committee and never made its way to the floor. All right, my last point is on international differences in out-of-school time, and just check my logic on this. So there are international differences in achievement. Yes. Out-of-school time impacts achievement. Yes, for good or for ill. Out-of-school time varies around the world. If you go back to Larson and Verma's Psych Bulletin in 1999, they'll show you that. If you look at the PISA study from 2011, they'll show you that. We've got a new paper from the TIMSS data that will show you that. There's variability in how countries use out-of-school time. So then it stands to reason that out-of-school time may contribute to international differences. Our focus has, of course, always been on what's happening in the classroom and the classroom teachers. But I think we need this broader view of education if we're really going to tackle the international differences and improve America's global competitiveness. We've been looking at this in the TIMSS data, and we've examined the amount of time that persons in nearly 50 countries have spent in a variety of out-of-school activities. Watching TV, using computers, hanging out with friends, doing chores, reading books, organized activities like sports, homework time, internet time, lots of different organized activities and some not organized activities. We find that above and beyond Human Development Index created by the UN, which is in basically the health of a nation, things like life expectancy, mean years of schooling, expected years of schooling, gross national income, which explains a huge amount of difference in international differences. Above that, these out-of-school variables are explaining an additional 18% of variance in 8th graders' math achievement, 18%, and 14% of variance in science achievement. So out-of-school is explaining quite a bit. And the last point is, it's even more complicated than that. Do I have 1 minute left? Okay. We also looked at patterns of time use around the world. And we found that certain countries tend to use their out-of-school time similarly, and others don't. These are showing some patterns in different colors. But the meaning of any particular out-of-school activity varies according to how it is clustered together. And so let's take sports. We're all familiar with sports. If you do a global correlation between sports and math achievement, the correlation is a whopping 0.00. There is no correlation between time spent in sports and achievement at the global level. But if you look at nations that have patterned sports together with things like computer use, time on the internet, socialization opportunities with friends, countries such as the United States, Norway, Israel, the Czech Republic, just as some examples that pattern time use that way, then there's a significant link between sports in that pattern and relatively high achievement. So I think that there's a lot to understand in terms of these international differences and the complexities of it. And the way to do it is to make sure that these international data sets begin to take out-of-school time seriously and incorporate really cutting-edge substantive measures of out-of-school time, which right now they're sort of lagging in. So I think I'm close to my 20 minutes. I don't know what my final thought would be. Somebody's got to be crazy about the kid. I say somebody's got to be crazy about Bronfenbrenner and his model and serious about implementing it. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Michael Yudin is the Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to coming to OSERS, Mr. Yudin served as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. In this role, he served as a Principal Advisor to the Assistant Secretary on Policy and Operations affecting all grants programs administered through that office. Prior to joining that Department of Education, Mr. Yudin spent 9 years in the United States Senate, serving as Legislative Director for Senator Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire and Senior Counsel to Senator Jeff Bingaman of New Mexico, and HELP Committee Counsel, I don't know what that, I don't help. It's literally help?
Education, labor, pension.
Okay, thank you. Those of us outside the Beltway don't always know all these. Committee Counsel to Senator Jim Jeffords of Vermont. In these roles, he assisted in developing, promoting, and advancing a comprehensive legislative agenda related to education, child and families, and disability and poverty. Mr. Yudin.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are y'all? So I didn't get a chance to participate in the conference these last 2 days, but I hear great things have been going on, and I'm looking forward to learning all about it. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm a little reluctant to say to Joe that, because he's asking me for money. Actually, one of my first jobs out of college was in an after-school program, and I had absolutely none of that training at all. So, anyway, so thanks for being here. High-quality middle school is absolutely critical to ensuring that our kids graduate from high school, college, and career ready. In this 21st century, knowledge-based economy, our kids need the education and the skills to succeed in the global economy. Regardless of income, regardless of race, ethnicity, whether the child has a disability, regardless of the language that the kid speaks, regardless of the address or the lack of an address, we know that these kids need the skills to compete. We know that the outcomes for kids that don't have skills are not good. This is more than just a moral imperative, however, right? This is an economic imperative. A generation ago, the United States led the world in college completion, and today we rank 14th. President Obama has said that the countries that out-educate us today out-compete us tomorrow. He has set a goal that by 2020, the United States will lead the world in college completion. So at the department, that's our North Star. That is guiding our efforts. We have a cradle-to-career strategy to address this, but this is a matter of economic security. Too many of our kids are dropping out of school. You all know that. 7,000 kids a day. 13 million kids over the next decade. We can't afford that. We cannot afford to waste that talent, that capital, that human capital. 90 million adults in this country lack the literacy and skills to actually meet the demands of the workforce. There are millions of jobs today in this economy that go unfilled due to a lack of a skilled workforce. Even in this economy, there are millions of jobs left open, unfilled, due to a lack of a skilled workforce. You guys know this. Research shows us, right, that we can identify about 75% of our future dropouts in large urban schools before they enter high school. Right? We can identify 75% of our future dropouts in large urban schools before they enter high school. Bob Balfance, a number of researchers have shown, right, there are these indicators that show that these kids are off track in middle school. Those indicators are poor course performance in English language arts and math, poor attendance, and a record of suspension or behavior problems. If a kid has those challenges, any of those challenges, that kid is off track. We can tell that. We know that before the kid enters high school. Former First Lady Laura Bush, I think, said, I'm going to screw up her quote, but she said, you know, kids drop out in middle school. They just don't leave until high school, right? The research shows we can do early warning indicator systems. I'm sure you all have talked about it. There's a great body of research that shows that early warning indicator systems work, right? It's targeting our efforts. It's identifying those kids that are performing poorly in reading, language, arts, and math, and making sure that they have the academic interventions to support that. If these kids are not going to pass these core credit-bearing courses in middle school, they're off track. But they need to be engaged, they need to come to school, and they need to be a part of the community. Bob Balfance, and through talent development and diplomas now, has developed an early warning indicator system, and they're actually reducing the number of middle school kids that are off track. Virginia, the state of Virginia has an early warning indicator system, right? And it spans pre-high school and high school. And they're looking at the scores of kids in English language arts and math in 7th and 8th grade, and the age of the student at 9th grade, and attendance and numbers of suspensions as well. But again, it's about ensuring that there are academic interventions in place so the kid is on track academically. It's about making sure that the kid is engaged. You know, Debbie talked about the I-3 grants, and I'm thrilled that they're able to move forward with that really important work. Talent Development, Diplomas Now, has an I-3 grant as well, and they have the Talent Development, which is the academic model for turning around low-performing schools and really providing the intensive academic instruction. But what they've done, and I remember talking to Bob Balfance 10 years ago, and he said, you know, we can do all that we can and get all the academics in place and get the structures right, but there are not enough bodies in the classroom to make sure that these kids are engaged. So what they have done, Talent Development, they've actually partnered with City Year. And they bring in these volunteers, these young, bright, wonderful young people to actually engage the students, to make sure, you know what, if that kid's not coming into school, I'm going to go and knock on that parent's door. Where are those kids? Where's your kid? Come to school. To address behavior problems, to really kind of address case management, to make sure that there's somebody engaged with the kid, that somebody's involved with the kids. And teachers simply just don't have as much capacity to do it. There's just not enough bodies in the building to do it. We've invested about $5 billion through our SIG grants, school improvement grants, turning around low-performing schools. About 20% of that is in middle school, which is a little over the proportion of middle schools in this country. So, 60% of the SIG grants are actually at secondary level. And we're really beginning to see some really important and interesting and exciting changes. We're seeing increases in reading and math, and that's great, and we need to keep doing that. But we're hearing from educators and parents, and I've been to a number of schools myself, and I'm talking to teachers and talking to kids. The kids are telling me, I feel challenged, and it's so different now. They feel safe. There's a culture, there's a climate that supports learning. We actually just announced a couple of days ago a partnership with the Corporation for National and Community Service to actually bring volunteers, similar to the Diplomas Now project, into our low-performing schools, into our SIG schools, and to create these partnerships, these community partnerships, to get the communities engaged and really support these kids, and we're really excited about it. Because we need to engage these kids. We need to make sure that they're learning in culture, in a culture that's safe and warm and embracing. It is absolutely critical to do that. When kids are not learning, when their conditions for learning are not optimal, how are they going to achieve? When they are being bullied, one of our priorities is bullying prevention. We've done a lot of work over the last couple of years in bullying prevention. If a kid is not only physically and emotionally threatened, how can that kid learn? But bullying creates conditions and cultures of fear and disrespect in a school, and that really cannot be tolerated. We've recently held our third annual Bullying Prevention Summit. Arnie Duncan has been present and engaged, and it's incredible. We have a number of technical assistance efforts and centers at the higher education level and down into K through 12, Safe Supportive Schools Technical Assistance Center, as well as equity assistance centers. We've provided guidance to states from our Office of Civil Rights on how when bullying actually crosses the line and actually becomes harassment. And we provided a significant amount of guidance to states on what are other states doing to prevent bullying in the classroom. Some other things that we're working on is to make sure that the learning environment is rich and nurturing and safe and actually optimal for learning is positive behavior interventions and supports, PBIS. It's a great body of research that shows that when you use this multi-tiered framework for behavior, it actually improves outcomes significantly. It improves student engagement, it improves grade retention, it improves achievement, it reduces dropouts. It came out of special education, positive behavior intervention supports. There is now positive behavior intervention supports, PBIS, is now in 17,000 schools around the country. I was just actually out in Kansas City at a PBIS school, school-wide. It's a school-wide program. Pretty rough neighborhood. This school was beautiful. It was an elementary school, so I know we're talking middle school, but it was an elementary school, and walked around the building, and these kids owned their school. They owned their behavior. There were signs and rules that they could understand and own. How they act in the classroom, how they act in the hallway, how they act on the bus, how they act in the cafeteria, how they act in after-school programs, how their parents can contribute to that and be a part of it. And these kids, and I walked around and visited classrooms, and these kids were working in small groups, and they were just beautiful and learning and engaged, and it was just great to see. So we're really excited about that and moving forward and expanding opportunities to that effect. A couple other things I just want to talk about. We have a Race to the Top district competition. We're in the middle of competing it out now. And we're really excited about that because that's about individualized, personalizing learning at the classroom level. And we think that's really going to provide us with some great, great models at the local level, at the building level. A couple of other things I just want to make sure that you're aware of. Trained counselors and psychologists are absolutely critical to this effort. We have a program that we just awarded 60 new grants, $21 million for school counseling grants, elementary and secondary school counselors. We need to make sure that we have skilled counselors and psychologists in the classroom, that we have these great community partnerships. Physical activity, Joe talked about, obesity. We have our PEP grants, our physical education program grants, that are really designed to ensure that kids are healthy and engaged. We've actually coordinated with the First Lady's Let's Move initiative to make sure that kids understand that physical activity also needs to be coordinated with healthy living and nutrition. Just one other thing I want to talk about, and then I'll wrap it up and happy to answer any questions that anybody has, is civic engagement. Civic engagement is absolutely critical. The president has identified this as a priority. Secretary Duncan has identified it as a priority. We need an informed, engaged citizenry. And kids need to be engaged. They need to be part of their communities. They need to be a part of it. Participate in civic life and democratic life. We've recently announced, put forward a roadmap to civic education that identifies a number of steps that we're taking and need to continue to take to engage kids in civic learning. We actually have a blog on our website that invites folks to comment and make suggestions and recommendations. So if you're interested in that, I urge you to come and check out our website, because we take that really seriously. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I think this is a critically important conversation to be having. And thanks, and see ya.
So before we, I'm going to try to summarize some points that I think might, at least from the perspective of a Positive Youth Development Center. But before we do that, is there any questions or comments specifically to the statements of the panelists? I wanted to give you a little opportunity to do that before we moved into the more general discussion. No questions for the United States government about education, huh? Other than, can we have some money? Well, okay. So I'm going to take this Friday afternoon, and you want to really get to things or get going. One of those two. So can we have a slide? So what I did was I tried to, this morning, think through what I was hearing. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be repetitive down to some of the phrasing, because I like some of those phrases too. I liked that somebody's got to be crazy about that kid. I'm going to be audacious and suggest that in addition to someone being crazy about the kids, they got to know what to do also. Because part of my career has been looking at things we all think are just amazingly wonderful things, and unfortunately there's enough evidence that sometimes we're real wrong about that. So we got to be crazy about these kids, but we got to think about what we're going to actually do with them as well, in terms of the kinds of programs and the kinds of approaches we use. Slide things. So I want to just start with youth and your students, and to think about those and some of the things we're talking about. First thing is to really cement this idea and start with this idea that these are very active, very capable people. The same side of the feeling of this is, they seem to be buzzing around, they seem to be difficult to pin down, it's hard to get them to stop and listen, they don't seem to, means they're very busy with thinking about it. I remember somebody talking about in adolescence, a neurobiologist was talking about, in adolescence things really do taste better. And they really do feel better than they ever do the rest of your life. It's not just that they're talking about it. And so that sensation seeking starts to have a very different point of understanding. And I think Jay did a great job of helping us locate this in a more, I think, appropriate and positive frame of they're very engaged and very active, and they're experiencing things intensely and in ways that could be very useful to us if we can join with them in that. And that in this time of transition, taking the phrase that in crisis there's opportunity, in transition there is great plasticity, and just as there's great opportunity for risk to increase, and we've done some great work in trying to show that there's work to be done in early adolescence because that's when risk is really starting to grow and spread as well as get more serious. It's also a time, though, of where we can secure and build on what's been the improvements and advances that we see from the elementary school time, and really kind of secure that. And if we're thinking about moving towards civic engagement and adult citizenship and responsibility for yourself, all these characteristics, that they're there. They just need to be developed. It's not that the frontal lobes don't exist till 25, it's that they continue to develop till 25. That means we have a great opportunity to really help that develop well. And it's going to be as much through helping make connections between those feelings and thoughts. And even as a very bad neuroscientist, poor approximation of a neuroscientist, it's going to be in that connection between those sensations and those feelings and the frontal lobes. It's not going to be that the frontal lobes are going to develop independently, and it's in the connection. Just as in socially, it's going to be how connected we can keep adolescents and how engaged we can keep with them. The second thing is the scaffolding idea. We kept hearing about wanting to manage their own lives and being able to manage their own learning more, but we also need to think about that as how do you help them do that? Somebody mentioned Kohut, and I spent time in Chicago, and if you spent time in Chicago when I was training, you had to learn Kohut because he was the prominent thinker. And he used to talk about good parenting and good psychotherapy was spoon-feeding reality. It was giving a person enough of experience of frustration and mastery that they could grow. And that's the idea I think we're talking about here, is not to treat them like children, not to assume they're like adults or incompetent adults that we have to tolerate until they become competent, but they need to be scaffolded along, that we're thinking about opportunities for more engagement, more control, more direction, but also strong support, clear norms and expectations, and the kinds of things that Deb did such a nice job of outlining in her presentation. Now, if we sort of say, okay, and these are my takeaways, and I suspect they're incomplete, probably a couple you don't necessarily agree with, and certainly some other ones that we should be thinking of, but I'm trying to sort of give us something that I could see, and particularly, again, thinking from a center that's trying to promote positive youth development. The professionalization of teachers is what I would say seems to be important. Two ways. One is that teaching is a profession, and it's not something that you do because you couldn't get into the harder to get into school, or it's not something that is done by lazy people who want union jobs, or it's not things that it's not something that has no skill base to it and no need for understanding of important things like development and the things that go on with having 20-some kids with you, or 30-some kids, depending on where you teach. And we can call it something else we want, but it's behavior management and how that makes a difference. And we know these things make a difference, yet we still haven't yet made those a necessary and requisite part of the skills that people have when they go into the classroom. So, for example, the idea that the most important thing of a first-year classroom is not that it's not so disorderly and loud that the principal has to come down and talk to you about it. It's about how do we train people, just as we wouldn't expect physicians or engineers or anyone else, that the best thing that they could do is not have any problems the first year, and they don't need any skills. They just have to learn about the content of their work. But making that a profession, but also making middle school understanding a professional idea. Also, to try and start to talk about kids, as we talked about, peers are very important, and classrooms are groups of kids, and kids are now engaged in active learning. The MacArthur Foundation's got very interested in kids and media because they're trying to understand why are kids so drawn to and so active and so engaged in learning, which is what online material is for them often. They're learning games, they're learning how to connect in different ways, and yet they're bored in schools. instead of thinking about what is it that we could get them to do to stop paying attention to the media that they're so engaged with and get interested in school, they want to understand what is it about that that's engaging them and how can we make that a part of education. So how do we help kids start to think about kids as groups of learners? We heard a lot of great ideas about collaborative work, about team activities, and also, by the way, these are the things that employers are saying they need in their employees. So these are not just ways to keep kids from being bored. These are skills they're going to need and they're going to transfer to making them stronger employees. If you went to the parental involvement area, the idea of child and parent goals, and I think this idea that the parents being able to have goals for their children and being engaged around that, which is different than the parents are responsible for making sure the kid meets the school's goals. And that the child has goals and should be expected to goals and can talk about those and then can be held to those goals. But the parent involvement, I think this is one of the points of what Nancy was talking about, that they have a very important job around the values around learning and the values around achievement and the values of engagement in school and the expectations of completion. So rather than digging into the book bag and double checking the homework, the expectation that you bring your book bag home and you open it up and show me things, or that you, and we're going to take time to do that and we're going to look at that, but these things, and that these things are important, but that's something that we can be focusing on and helping with the parents, particularly at this age. And the reach out to parents from the school, and particularly the parents who might have kids who seem to be at risk, and to reach out with them before it's about something where there's trouble. So the idea, one of our interventions, what we did that was always was impressive to watch, is we'd have parents and kids do two things. We'd have the parents have the kids have to go through a whole day of school explaining to the parents what teacher they had and what they did and what was the best thing that happened in that class and the worst thing. And it was torturous for them. And it was very hard. And it was probably, for many of these families, the first time they'd had a discussion about school that wasn't the parents wagging their finger at the kid, telling them why they should do well in school and why they should work hard and doing most of the talking. And it really kind of changed in ways that was always impressive as I watched it, because I didn't expect it to be that profound. But for a number of people, this is the first time they've really had a conversation about school that was about what was going on from the child's perspective, and the parents were listening. Second thing we did was we said, okay, now we want you parents to tell kids about the thing that you like best about school and the thing you found the hardest about school. And a couple of interesting things happened there that we thought was interesting. First of all, it changed from, as we wanted to with adolescents, it changed from the parents telling kids they should do great in school, and with the illusion that school was something they were always dedicated to, always worked hard on, always tried and probably went through with great success, to here's what I liked about it, and here's the thing I didn't like. And very typically, those were the things that the kids were struggling with, because these things run in families. And it created a way to talk about school that was not about the problem, is the point. And I think that there's this idea, if we could reach out to at-risk, not about because there's problems, but because we want to start to understand what your goals are for your child, then this goal of the teachers that when we talk to the kids, it will be about, we'll already have a baseline relationship for that can occur. If we move up to the community level, the schools as central, and I was trying to think, I think it was the communities and schools, somebody had the school in a big box with everybody around it. I don't remember which one that was. Milbury? Thank you. Sorry, but I'm borrowing ideas from everybody here, mixing them up, which at some level is probably a good thing. But not the only organization in child education and child development. So it's not just about how can we help schools educate better, and it's not just about schools will take care of education and we'll take care of after school time and we'll take care of recreation, but how do those things work? And this idea of the petri dish, of the intermixing and the growing and the culture of development, but also the idea of the router, the relationships as routers, so that there really is this, how does communication occur, as well as how do we create structures for that, data sharing being a big one, and then secondly, the connection and the relationships and the development of those. And so the schools become the center of child development, but not the child development center. If we move up the policy level, as we were walking up, I said to Michael, I said, well, if there's one thing I would like to ask you to take back with you, it's that middle schools are the key to affecting our high school dropout rate. And he said, well, that's just what I'm going to talk about. So it was very nice to hear about that and to come back at that again. I've worked in prevention, and prevention earlier is better, and most of us would admit that early education is terribly critical. But I think what we've forgotten in the meanwhile is the huge amount of opportunity and the huge amount of taking kids who are at risk and moving them over to where they're ready to drop out. They just are waiting for high school, and what we could do about that. And so the critical role we can have here in helping kids to come back and build off of what often is very powerful in kids when they're in elementary school, which is the desire to achieve, the desire to do well, the desire to become the kind of person that their parents and their schools want, and to cement that, again, rather than trying to just assume that path is set. And then also the idea of engaging with and having engaged youth, and finding ways that, again, I'm going to lose track of who said this, but the concept of mattering. Somebody talked about the concept of mattering, and knowing that what you did was important to somebody, knowing that somebody was crazy about what you did, but also that you are doing something that is useful, that really makes a difference. So whether it's working on, a wonderful example is in a neighborhood that was in Chicago, very high-risk neighborhood, is working on a house that was going to be a center where kids could go. And so they had actually worked on this house, and it became off territory to any gang kind of graffiti or anything, because that was built by the kids and that was owned by the neighborhood. Another way to think about this, to give you another example from Chicago, is when they had the block parties, typically what they would do is they would have people stand guard to try and keep the kids out, because they didn't want gang activity and they didn't want loud kids in the block party and ruining it for the adults and the children. And what happened was a guy who was a street artist, what he did was he started engaging the kids and using video. And so at the end of the block, he had these videos that kids had made that people could watch. And so they were now a productive, still loud, still noisy part of the block party, rather than the trouble that was keeping people from being able to enjoy it. So engaging the youth in what they want to do and in the problem solving. And then coming back to research and researchers, because I have this belief that researchers have utility and are useful and should continue to try and do what they do, is really trying to think about, I was thinking about your schools, and you were talking about all these qualities. And what we do is we spend a lot of time developing models and testing that model, or we spend a lot of time sort of trying to figure out how things don't go well, and then what we can do about that. So I think this idea, if we could start to look at models of what does occur and how do we capture that and start to systematize that and think about that, and then and test that out. So how do things go well, not only in programs, but how do children do well? How do things like entrepreneurial spirit, which we all believe is terribly important, intellectual and scientific curiosity, generosity and commitment, these kinds of characteristics we all believe are important. We don't study them because I don't know quite why. What we study is, selfishness and problem behavior and those sorts of things. But if we started to understand how those things develop, and perhaps even how the promotion of those helps with development, we might gain a lot more and actually have a lot more effective programs. But if we could also look at how things go well in programs, to start modeling those, and then to see what kinds of developmental impacts they're having, then we can again spread that further and quicker. And then I just added this idea of technology use and effects. I think everybody agrees that the big change in the last 15, 20 years has been the extent to which where we leave off and the computer starts is not clear anymore. And how do we start, and it's an integrated part of life. I'll tell another story from MacArthur. Connie Yall shows this video of two kids sitting on a couch playing a video game. And they're playing together and they're playing with somebody that's about 1,000 miles away who's also on a computer. And the question is this a closer relationship? Are they playing with each other and this person's a part of their play? Are they more connected? And she starts to raise these questions that I think are very important. And her position is that their best understanding is, according to those kids, there's no difference between the two sitting next to each other and the ones 1,000 miles away in terms of how engaged they are and how much they're being friends and how much they're learning from each other. That difference is a generational difference, because we believe your closeness has to do with whether you're physically present with each other or not. They're not thinking about technology the same way. So how do we start to think about that? How do we integrate that so that as we do move forward, we can start to think about this idea that somebody talked about, which is whether or not making them power down their cell phone is really a lost opportunity rather than a way of getting enough control that we can go about educating them. That should be it. So that's my attempt, not meant to be foreclosing and certainly not complete. And so from that, I want to sort of ask you to each sort of start to talk about things you think are critical for us to consider as we start to move forward, so that we can really realize this idea of middle schools as positive youth development centers. Does anybody want to start? Who has additional comments? What's the one or two things, three things you think would be critical for your colleagues and other people to take home with them? Is it that late on Friday? Yeah. We'll get you a mic.
I'm Noelle again, and I guess I'm just thinking about something related to this last point, just to throw something out there around, for example, technology, right? I think this is something where the generational divide is so clear, and it makes me wonder, and I don't know if this is something that we've talked about as much directly, but if people have ideas on bridging intergenerational divides. So I see that as like a huge part of connecting with youth, is kind of getting into their world. But that seems really challenging for a lot of adults, especially adults who have been, teaching or in the system for a long time. So I didn't know if anybody had thoughts on that, just more generally.
So the issues of access to and ability to use digital.
Well, or just in general, for adults to be able to get into kids' world.
So,
Not just, technology is just an example.
right. So you want to say something about that?
Your question kind of bridges to a comment I wanted to make, which is, I'm Mary Ferguson, Director of Education for Big Brothers Big Sisters, but before this I came from higher ed, specifically a college of education where I worked with graduate students who were all practicing teachers. So I take some of this back to teacher preparation. And I asked this question yesterday with another representative from the U.S. Department of Education, is how is the information that we're learning about the critical years of middle grades, what we know about, I worked with teachers who don't know about civic learning. So how are they going to work with young people? They don't know about youth culture. They don't know about, we used terminology like ageism and adultism, which schools are built on, and how that affects school climate and culture, and whether or not we engage and empower youth. So I kind of take it back to how we're preparing both classroom teachers, school leaders, and then after school, out of school time employees. So I think there's a piece that we have to connect there.
If I may just, I mentioned the Race to the Top district competition in my remarks a few minutes ago. And it's really, and it's about, individualized, personalized learning in the classroom. But one of the key features of it is about technology and how do you use technology in the classroom. And we really need to learn how to do it, right? I mean, it's not just about, plopping an iPad down in a classroom and go. right? I mean, teachers really need to understand it. So, hopefully we can get some really great models of success and best practices out there and learn from those.
Out-of-school context can provide significant opportunities for that classrooms may not be able to, but again, provided that those educators are trained in the use of technology, which often they're not. And I wanted to, if I could interject one other point, which is someone asked a question about how we could better connect education and science with policy. And I look at the scientists in the room, and I think that you should make an effort to understand policy in a way that most of us don't. Most of us are sort of satisfied with our final paragraph in our journal article, implications for policy, and we leave it at that, and we imagine that somehow Michael Yudin's going to pick up that article and read that last paragraph and go to town with it. That's not how it happens, and I didn't know how it happens, and that's why I spent a year on a congressional fellowship working in the Senate to figure out how it does happen. It happens a lot in different ways, but it happens a lot by relationships, and knowing who actually can move the policy forward, and it's an invaluable experience, and you would be out of your comfort zone, and you would develop and grow, but you would be so much richer for it. And I think we would actually start to have a field that's much more integrated between science and policy and practice if we had more scientists actually digging into policy.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take up with that as well. When I said we're tired of being sort of the menu, one of the things that we've tried to do also is to raise the awareness of middle grades education through advocacy work. And that's something that when we all put our efforts together, I think we can do more effectively, because so many people in the field don't even know exactly what it is or the impact it can have. And then we have to somehow get the policy people to pay attention to that and find a route for us to actually get some policy in place that would make it happen for us more.
One more thing to say, actually. We talked about 21st century after-school programs and extended learning time, and I actually visited a school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a middle school in Albuquerque. It was about 6 years ago, and it's a citizen school program, and it's an extended learning time program. It started in Boston, and they're expanding, and it brings community partners into the classroom, and they actually had nuclear physicists, nuclear engineers actually in the classroom in middle school teaching these kids about robotics, and they were helping prepare them to compete, statewide and then nationally in a robotics competition. I mean, that's what it's about, right? It's about bridging those worlds and creating those partnerships, because the teachers don't necessarily know how to do that, but the nuclear engineer does, right? And really kind of creating those partnerships.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Penny Bishop from the University of Vermont. I have two comments, one regarding educational policy and the other around practice. The first is just to underscore Debbie's comments. I think we need to think carefully about the potential acknowledgement of the middle years as a distinct tier of schooling, and we continually are fighting that battle, and discourse matters. We continue to call it the Elementary and Secondary Act, and that's been it forever. Maybe a small thing, maybe semantics, maybe not. And it wasn't even until 2008 that the middle grades were even named in federal legislation, ever. So I think we have a long way to go. But I'm really encouraged by the conversation that I've heard over the past 2 days in that regard. The second one pertains to educational practice. And I think I would just encourage us all to question some of our assumptions around the structure of the middle grades and middle years. I was listening to the parent involvement panel and thinking about how uninterrogated our assumptions are about teachers having 100 kids a day. They do, lots of them, because we tend to move into these interdisciplinary teams. We have 4 teachers and 1 for each core subject area, and we've sort of used this modified junior high model for quite a while now, which does mean teachers have to create relationships with 100 kids a year, and then you change kids, and there's sort of this practice going on where then you have to connect with different families and so on. So you can see the ripple effect of that. But there are lots of alternative structures. There are 2 teacher teams where you've got 40 to 50 kids on a team where you're teaching 2 content areas that really enable you to deepen relationships with kids. There are multi-age and looping options where teachers are able to connect with families over multiple years. So I think sometimes we forget to question the traditional structures in schools, and I think there's a lot of solutions that lie in that.
Can I just make a quick comment? So I totally appreciate your remarks, about the lack of the terms, middle grades or middle school in ESEA. Just as a little note, worked in the Senate for many years, and the ability to actually define those terms is really challenging just because states define them so differently, so from a federal level perspective. But it doesn't diminish the need, right? Particularly, around teacher training, right? I mean, in the STEM areas, right? Teachers in middle school, in the middle grades, don't necessarily have the education and training to be, math teachers at that level, or pre-algebra or algebra teachers, right? That mostly maybe have an elementary or general ed. So I think, there's a piece of legislation called America Competes, and that was passed into law a few years ago. And that actually does, I think, if my memory serves me, contain the words middle in it, because we were really trying to get at those skill gaps, particularly in teacher training and teacher professional development.
Kind of come back to Noelle's comments about technology, because I've been wondering about this as well, and how the teachers perceive this in terms of, is it a distraction in the classroom? Is it, a great revolution in terms of improvements? And more fundamentally, I guess, like, how do we know? How do we get, data about how to use the technology best if there are things currently underway in terms of comparing classrooms with and without? And then just 2 other concepts that came up at the breaks and supper that I thought were really interesting was the flipping, so I didn't use the right term probably, but that concept, and MOOCs. I just wanted to learn a bit more if people in this room have thoughts on flipping and MOOCs.
Is everybody familiar with these concepts? Probably not. Okay, so I can do flipping. I can't do the second one. So no, you can tell me if I did flipping. People are really. So flipping is that, for example, instead of me lecturing in my class and then sending you home to do homework, where you might apply it, is I actually give you the lecture online or something like that you do as your homework before the class, and then in the class time we work on the application and the problem solving and the group work. So it's flipping what we typically do in teaching and homework. Is that close? Those who know it better than I do? And then moots, I'll let somebody else do.
And that's just when you have a teacher that travels with a group of students for more than 1 year. So if I could loop with a single teacher or 2 teachers, I could be with a group of students from 6th grade to 7th grade. I would say that's a loop, or 7th to 8th, or all 3 grades, or the same teachers.
Same students.
I probably said it wrong, but it was related to like online learning. It was like MOOCs with an M is related to like online learning and getting badges or certificates and mastering content, but not in a formal university or classroom, but freely over the internet.
So like this, like these badges idea that there's,
Yeah.
there's
So I'm drawing
discrete
a blank on what MOOC actually
period.
stands for, but there are increasingly these incredible opportunities for free access to really rich learning opportunities. Sebastian Thrama he's out of Stanford. He's no longer affiliated with Stanford. He works for Google. He works with Google. He put his courses on artificial intelligence online, and I'm going to make this number up because I don't remember what it is, but he got like millions of people worldwide taking his courses. And the number of people, and women across the country in countries that don't have access to education, it's the next step. It is without doubt the next step.
Other comments? Well, can we get the blog piece up? So in terms of next steps for us, because as my colleague at APA, we used to always have meetings at American Psychological Association on the weekend, and she would always say, now when you go back to your lives, and your real lives, and you forget about what you did this weekend, and then she'd try and create these requirements for us to do work. We don't want you to go back to your lives and forget this. We want you to go back to your lives and then bring this, but also bring it back to some more. A number of the people, the panelists are going to be asked to provide some input to what will be a booklet and a multimedia version of the booklet that will come out from this. But we also want additional participation. And one idea we have for that is through this blog that we have on Youth-Nex. That you can contact Ellen Daniels and she can connect you up in terms of direct input. But we have a particular idea we want you to pursue, if you would. And that is to find somebody who's an early adolescent, it could be even your own child, and talk to them about this conference a little bit. And then ask them to blog with you. Or even just you go ahead and blog and then let them blog. We'd like to get an early adolescent response to something that the adults talk to them about early adolescence into this. And we're hoping what that can do is start to create not only a set of interesting commentaries from you all, so we can keep this going, but to start to get that exchange going online and to make it more prominent. So if you could each raise your hand if you're promised to do this sometime in the next week. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Anybody else?
We'll have more hands.
A little more hands. Keep your hands up. Come on. Who else? Anybody else going to do it? Okay. Well, that's enough to start. All right. If you have your hand up and there's somebody next to you who doesn't have your hand up, glare at them. No. We really look. We want to thank you all for coming, for making this a very interesting and rewarding and much better than we expected it to be, which is always a nice thing to feel at the end of one of these meetings. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this, both through the products that will come out from this, but also as we cross paths and as we continue to work on these kinds of issues, either locally or nationally. And we hope you've met someone you're going to do something new with and be able to move your work along. Thank you.